Hi there, this is the front-end web development class. My name is Jeffrey. We're going to start on our recap on, we're going to be talking about jQuery mostly during our recap because the class in earnest is on AngularJS, and it's important to sort of understand like where people were before they started taking a look at libraries like Angular. And also it'll help reacquaint us with the thing that we're going to be pretty much transforming into an Angular app throughout the class, because we've already built a little jQuery-based Twitter application, essentially. And if the NoiseBridge wiki will actually load, then I can show it to you. If it won't load, then I can just basically take you guys to jeffreyhw/fwd on GitHub. So you've probably seen this, you've probably downloaded this. If not, go to jeffreyhw/fwd, github.com, and go ahead and clone the repository. If you don't know how to clone, you weren't here for that class, just download the zip file, it's fine. It's really just for you to be able to take a look at Series 10 class, oh, great, I forget, class 8? Let me double check here. No, class 7. Yeah, I think class 7 is when we last talked about this application, because we were dealing in Ajax and stuff like that. This is fine. Yeah, class 7. Class 7 is what I want you guys to download. So yeah, go ahead and download that, open it up, Series 10, class 7, and we're going to take a look at that. So go ahead and open up index.html when you are there. This version is the one that doesn't have Ajax in it, which is good because we're probably not going to do the whole Ajax part of transferring it over to Angular. We could if we had time, but we probably won't. I used to teach two weeks on Angular, one on kind of the basics and more on like I don't know, some more advanced stuff. But I'm going to kind of pare it down this time and replace that time with talking about React instead, which we'll be talking about next week. So anyway. This is what we put together last time around. I'm paying for my lazy mistake of not putting the buttons on all 3 tweets, and so it looks a little weird to pretend there are buttons on all of these. And as usual, we can go ahead and use the developer tools to take a look at the parts of the page. So what I want you guys to go to, as usual when we're debugging JavaScript, I want you guys to go to the sources panel here. Again, to open up this developer tools thing, it's just right-click anywhere on any page and click inspect, and this whole thing should pop up. We want to go over to sources because we want to read through our app.js file and see what this whole thing's about. What's worth noting here is that this is more a traditional JavaScript, more a traditional website in that everything that you see on the page initially has been loaded via the initial HTML request. So all this stuff that we're seeing here, it's all pretty much available via view source. The code that we've written in JavaScript is not responsible for generating all of this stuff. But we'll be seeing that will, well, actually, I might take that back. With Angular, you can do it that way, or you don't have to. It depends on how far I get. But yeah, as you can see, this is all just kind of static stuff. And we're using jQuery to bring it to life versus using some sort of JavaScript library to create the code in the first place, which is what some people do. Which is what some libraries do, and which we'll be talking about eventually in this class. Anyway, as usual with jQuery, you go ahead and use the $sign function to find something on the page, passing in a string representing a selector. So we're selecting the form on the page. We're selecting the text area on the page. And when we do that sort of thing, we're able to add event listeners to these specific things. So the way that a jQuery-powered page usually works is that we are adding event listeners to certain stuff to make it respond to your interactions. So for example, if you submit a form, run this function. If you key up on a text area, that is lift your finger from the keyboard, then go ahead and run this function. If you click anything with a class of tweets, then run this function. And same thing here, if you click something with a class of tweets, run this function. So, that's what event listeners are all about. We'll see that event listeners are assigned differently when we start talking about Angular. But, there are some things that certainly match up. For example, regardless of what kind of library you're using, you're probably going to want to prevent the default from occurring. The default behavior is whatever will happen on an HTML page when you click something. I say HTML page because I mean this is like what will happen with zero CSS, zero JavaScript, just what these things are meant to do. For example, clicking a link brings you to another page. Submitting a form submits that form and brings you to the next page. So when you prevent default, you are preventing that sort of stuff from happening. You can even prevent default on like typing in the field if you wanted to. If you wanted to prevent default on the key down event, you could prevent someone from typing into it. Or you could just set the attribute to disabled, which will do it in HTML. Attribute disabled to disabled or true or whatever. But anyway, what we're trying to do is prevent the form from submitting because we're trying to treat this as a single-page application, or SPA. A single-page application basically means that everything that you do on this page, everything that you need to do in this application is done on this page without you ever having to refresh it or navigate to a different page or anything like that. So, you know, making sure that you don't leave the page, and then in most cases, is one of the kind of, you know, one of the features or common, you know, features, yeah, whatever, of a single-page application. But what we're going to find at the end of this class is that this code, the additional code that I've written here is quite silly. Because what I'm doing right now is in order to add a new tweet on the page, which is what this thing does. See, I just added a new tweet on the page. It goes ahead and finds some code that's already on the page, that is to say, an element on the page, and it duplicates it, it clones it, changes all the stuff inside it, and puts it back on the page. That's a little silly because it makes the assumption, for one thing, that there actually is one of these elements on the page. It makes the assumption, well, or it doesn't necessarily make the assumption, but it has to remove all of the state from this element before it can put it on the page again. For example, if you retweet this, then now this tweet has the state of retweeted, or specifically the class of retweeted. So we have to make sure to remove the class of retweeted or liked from anything that we're going to be duplicating, which is kind of silly. We really shouldn't have to do that when we put something new on the page. That should really just be kind of like the template, if you will, for tweets. Yeah, let me see here. What else? We're changing around some content. We're finding the tweet time, which is this element, which has the class of tweet time, changing it to now. We're finding tweet content and changing it to the new tweet text value, which is the current value of the text area. You know, that's stuff you'll probably have to do regardless of what language you're using. You have to replace some values based on other stuff. And finally, when we're all done, we change the value of the text area back to nothing. And then at the end, we prepend the new tweet that we created, that we cloned, onto the page. So there's that. Let me see here. Any questions so far about recapping stuff, how that works, why it works, whatever else? Okay. So next up, we talk about calculating remaining characters. As you can see, when I enter stuff into this form, oh, you know, I just realized something. I missed something. You notice how when I enter something in and I press tweet, that the number stays the same? That's a bug, and that bug could easily be fixed if I simply put calculate remaining characters right here. You know, because that would also kind of reset the form. That is yet another one of those things you actually don't have to worry about when we talk about other sorts of libraries. We don't really have to worry about the state of the DOM. We just have to basically bind this little number to whatever the value is in that thing, and then the library will take care of the rest. So that's one of the things to look forward to with a better or a more catered toward this sort of interaction library, like Angular or React or whatever. But yeah, if we put this here, then you know, does this like do a runtime replacement? Yeah, it does. That's really cool. You can actually in this sources thing, you can edit the JavaScript and save it, and it turning this really weird shade of pinkish, reddish, whatever, means that it's now running off this version of it. It's kind of hot swapped the script. It's already been loaded into the page with this new version. So as you can see, it works. Ta-da, calculate remaining characters. So as you can see, calculate remaining characters takes the text area value, subtracts its length from the character limit, which is 140 up here, and then it changes the text of the counter, which is this thing here, and it makes sure that the tweet button will be disabled or not disabled based on the amount of remaining characters. Specifically, this is a really, really big Boolean string or Boolean expression that says is remaining characters less than 0, or, that's what these two pipes mean, is remaining characters equal to character limit. That is to say, if remaining characters is 140, or if remaining characters is less than 0, then you should disable it. Because less than 0 means you went over the limit. 140 means you didn't type anything. So in both cases, we don't want you to submit anything. Yeah, so that's what happens every single time you key up on the text area. It also happens when the page loads, and it also happens when you submit a tweet. So as you can see, it's nice to have these sorts of functions that we can use all over the place, so create functions. Yeah, and then finally, at the end of the last jQuery class that we talked about, we were talking about delegating events, delegating event listeners to child elements. What I mean by that specifically is, as you can see, when I press retweet and like on this thing, it works. But interestingly enough, this element did not appear on the page when we loaded the page. I'm sorry, it didn't exist on the page when we loaded the page. So instead of looking for every single one of these buttons that exists when the page loads and adding event listeners to that, think about it. If we did that, then if a new button was added to the page, we wouldn't actually have an event listener on that. Even if it was cloned from a previous button that already exists, those JavaScript tie-ins, those don't carry over as well. So this retweet button would be inactive, but instead of adding a listener to the actual retweet button or the actual like button, we're adding a click listener to another thing called tweets, which in this case is this entire section. See how I'm highlighting the whole thing? This whole section, tweets, will always exist regardless of how many tweets live inside it. So you can definitely say that that can be clicked, and that can certainly be selected when the page is loaded, because even if there is 0, it will live there. So what this is basically saying here is on click, comma, dot retweet. It's basically saying, hey, tweets, if you get clicked, but the actual click happens to land on something called retweet inside you, then run this function. So, in other words, we're not talking to the retweet thing specifically. We're talking to its parent, which will definitely exist when the page loads. So that's that sort of event delegation thing, which helps out significantly. And what we're doing is saying this. I also talked about the context variable this, which exists within the scope of every function as something different. In the case here, jQuery has called this function such that this always corresponds to the specific button that was just clicked. So because we know that, we can say things like this.closest tweet. Closest means closest parent. So you just keep going up the chain for this button here, up and up until we find tweet. And so that's the closest tweet. And we toggle class retweeted, meaning we add retweeted or remove it based on whether it was there or not. We're not specifically adding the class to this button. That's something that will make even more sense by the end of this class. We're adding we're adding the class retweeted to the tweet itself, even though it's only really just the button that's changing color. As you can see in our CSS, we're saying retweeted space dot retweet, meaning a retweet button inside something else that is retweeted becomes green. Why not just add the class to this button? Because I like to keep all of my state for this tweet in one place. It makes me easily be able to tell, just find all the tweets on the page which have a certain status. It also makes it a little bit more lenient for me to be able to style this different ways. If I want to have like a little, instead of this retweet button being green or whatever, I could put like a little badge in the corner, like a little green badge saying retweeted. Or I can hide or show other things. So the higher up the class goes, the better. A lot of pages will actually sometimes have classes in the HTML tag or sometimes the body tag, which are there for status purposes, but they allow like the entire page underneath it to be styled however you like. This is going off on a tangent, but there's a library called Modernizer. Modernizer is a feature detection library for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. What that means is that it runs a whole bunch of tests every time the page loads, and then it adds a bunch of classes to, oh, it doesn't. Well, interesting. Well, let's go to another page that uses it, lab0.com, that's my company's site. as you can see here, this HTML element has a whole bunch of class stuff. And no touch, hash change, history, RGBA, background size. These are a whole bunch of tests that lab0.com runs. And based on whether those classes are in the HTML element or not, you can style things underneath it however you want based on what's supported. So the same with JavaScript. You can basically say, like, if the HTML tag has a class of so-and-so, then run some additional stuff. So it's really cool. It's just a little thing that adds these things for you, and based on the classes in the page, or more programmatic stuff, you can say modernizer dot so-and-so to find out whether something is true or false. You can make the page act differently just based on all that stuff. So that is the reason why I like putting classes as high as possible. Yeah. So that is pretty much my run through of the jQuery code we've written so far. I forgot to open up my little YouTube comment thing, so I'm going to see if anyone's been saying some stuff. 1 second. Also, events. Oh, good, live now. Let's open up the live chat. Any live chat? Nope, no live chat. Good. Okay. Yeah, well, I've got another 14 minutes to talk about pretty much anything. So if anyone has any questions about this or wants to know anything that they think might be helpful to them in anticipation for learning a little bit about Angular or anything else, just tell me. I guess I could point out now, well, no, I'll talk about it when the class starts, about Angular 1 and Angular 2. They're different, and I'll be talking about Angular 1 specifically. So yeah, there's that. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, I'm going to be hanging out and come back at 8 o'clock for new stuff. Certainly get a lot of spam on Twitter every time that I announce my class. A lot of businesses looking for words like Angular, thinking that it's very relevant, and then they follow me. I might have run out block. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Having trouble reaching Noise Bridge. Is there any class materials you need to download today? Yes, the class materials you need to download today are right here. You probably already have this because you probably have the Git repository locally. It's Series 10, Class 7. I don't know why noisebridge.net won't load. Looks like the HTML finally loaded, but the CSS did not. So yeah, I don't know. It seems very slow. Hello. We're starting new stuff at 8. Okay. Yes. As usual. I'm also doing a recap. I already went through a recap of previous stuff, so if you have any questions about anything, anything you feel like you might need to know before we start, then I'm here to answer your questions. Okay.
Yeah, so SQL and use database and then connect the last name. That's you. That's H. You this one. And the last line is Those are from the Droplet. Droplet is and they don't really exist. I never made that. So you could have that same seed.
There we go.
Oh, Johnny was supposed to be a type. You gotta have it in your hands. I didn't have to create the you can create the it's just the text why turn it on
Cool. I'm gonna get started on new stuff. All right. Hi. This is the front-end web development class. My name's Jeffrey. We're gonna talk about AngularJS today. So AngularJS is not at Angular.io. It's AngularJS.org. Let's talk about that. There's Angular 1 and Angular 2. They have slightly different names. This is called AngularJS 1 and this is called Angular 2. But the big difference is that there's 1 and there's 2. So why am I teaching 1 and not 2? Well, the deal is that they are quite different from one another. They're very, very different. They have significantly different approaches, different ways that you have to set it up to use it. Just a very different approach. And what's more, Angular 2 just came out. I haven't used it. I haven't gotten the opportunity to use it. I don't really feel like I want to use it. So I'm teaching AngularJS 1 because it is in wide use. A lot of people are using it. It's still being developed one way or another. you know, people are kind of not moving from one to two as much as they are moving from one to other libraries such as React, which I'll be talking about next week. But I think one is still useful to understand. It gives you, well, it gives you a nice, now that you know like how a sort of a jQuery thing works, it gives you a good example of how something called an MVC library works, Model View Controller, or Model View in this case. Well, there are controllers too, library. The general idea behind Angular and other MV whatever libraries is that they separate out the model and the view. Now, the model and the view are concepts. They refer to, the model refers to the data in your application. That is to say, what sort of data is on the page, not necessarily how it's laid out in HTML. That's what the view is. The view is what HTML should we be spitting out to represent our data. So by data, you know, if I didn't close it, if we go to our noise Twitter page, the data on this page would be these 3 tweets. There are 3 tweets on this page. They are by Jeffrey. The first one says you give a bad name. The second one says blah blah blah. That is data. This is me just representing it, speaking it, because there is no, there is no visual representation of the model that other than the view that is the view does. So this separation between model and view makes it so you can always know what the view is going to look like based on what is in the model. In the case of jQuery, you need to continue to massage the DOM, change the view around itself to be able to make sure that anything additional that you add to it is correctly moved over. It's kind of like you've got a canvas, on which you've painted a whole bunch of oil strokes and whatever, and to make any changes, you have to sort of paint on top of it. That's kind of the old guard with jQuery and whatever. This new thing, essentially, you paint something based on your information. You get new information. You throw that canvas away, and you paint an entire new one. That sounds like it might be overkill or whatever, but these libraries have a very good way of only updating what needs to be updated. So they're pretty efficient at what they do. And yeah, so in other words, you don't have to worry about what your view ends up. You don't have to worry about maintaining your view so much as you just have to worry about what you want the view to look like. And then you change your data around. So that separation makes things pretty nice, pretty efficient, easier to work with in many cases, especially a case like this where in my recap I talked about some downsides of this whole sort of like, your view is also your data sort of thing. So let's separate them. AngularJS, much like jQuery or whatever else, is a JavaScript library. So if we want to download it, then well, there's some options. Let's use the stable version. Minified is fine. Just like jQuery, Angular is a big file that has a whole bunch of JavaScript that you usually probably should not care about. There's a lot of very ridiculous optimized stuff that's going on there. So minified is fine. We don't really need to look into it. And then these are different ways to get it. You can just download it. You can press the download button, which will give you which will give you the JavaScript file, which is probably what we want. Or you can reference it from a content delivery network that is someplace online that has the file available for you. Or you can use Bower or NPM, 2 different package managers that allow you to simply just install something by name. I'm just going to keep things basic because this is really just a basic HTML, CSS, JavaScript thing, and I'm going to just download the JavaScript file. So press the download button, and there you go. Go ahead and take Series 10 Class 7 and make a copy of it in your own workspace. Don't make a copy of it here. Don't duplicate it here. That's for me to do. I don't want you to do it in the download of my front-end web development thing because the next time you pull my stuff, it'll override all the work that you did. So make sure that, as usual, you make a copy of this folder and put it into your own workspace, some other folder on your computer. That said, I'm creating a copy. Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this. OK, great. All right, so got my new folder with all the stuff from Class 7, and I'm going to start making some changes to it. I'm going to be loading up Angular, and we're going to see what an Angular application, a very basic one, looks like. The good thing about this is that we can actually do it a little piecemeal. We can do it piece by piece. Angular works alongside jQuery. In fact, if jQuery has been loaded, Angular can make use of jQuery to maybe, I'm not sure if the term is speed up, but make more efficient some ways that it accesses the code. It will essentially, Angular ships with its own kind of mini version of jQuery, but if jQuery is already there, then it will go ahead and use that. So they work hand in hand in some ways. Remember that Angular is still responsible for changing around your view, and that's what jQuery pretty much just does. It just changes your view, so it makes use of that. So or it doesn't have to. So again, it's an optional optional dependency. Okay, cool. So all that said, let's go ahead and take angular.min.js and just drag it right in here. And we're going to open up our index.html file in our text editor. Hello, where is it? Didn't open. Let's try that again. There we go. And we're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom here and include our new Angular file here. Script source angular.min.js. There you go. Cool. So, yeah, let me just make sure you do that. So the only amount of bootstrapping that we have to do in our JavaScript file to sort of like tell this page, hey, there's going to be an Angular app. We're going to give it a name. We're going to say that it's a certain thing, and then we're going to tie it into the page in a certain way. So this is the first step, is just making Angular aware of the fact that we want to turn this page into an Angular application. So what does that look like? We're going to open up app.js. Just go ahead and do this. And down here at the very bottom, I'm going to leave all this jQuery stuff here at a time. Essentially, throughout this class, I'm going to, bit by bit, just remove our jQuery stuff once it becomes useless. Once we write the code to sort of replace it. First thing we do, though, is we say angular.module, and I'm going to say noise Twitter, and then I pass in an empty array for now. Okay. So Angular, of course, has been loaded up by the fact that we loaded up angular.min.js. When we say angular.module noise Twitter, and then we pass in an empty array, what we're saying is we're creating a new module called noise Twitter. And this array denotes any sort of dependencies, any sort of Angular-specific dependencies for this module that we're creating. A module is just another fancy name for, well, it's kind of a block of code or a collection of code. And in this case, we're going to be using this module to control the DOM of our page, control all the HTML. Right now, we don't have any dependencies on other Angular modules that might have been created otherwise. But much like how there are jQuery plugins or NPM modules or Bower modules, if you remember that class, same thing happens with Angular. You can go ahead and load up other Angular-powered JavaScript files, if you will, and list them out here and make use of them one way or another. So that's nice. Okay, but so that's one step. But the next step is interesting. In jQuery, we write JavaScript code that grabs onto the DOM and makes changes to it from the JavaScript code. But interestingly enough, even though Angular is this library that's all about writing more just better JavaScript to do certain stuff, we actually are going to go into our HTML file and add in a few special properties to certain elements to tie things together. It's kind of interesting. Let's start off at the body, all the way up here. And the body is going to get a new attribute called ngapp, and we're going to say noise Twitter. NG, by the way, stands for Angular. So that's just NG whenever you see that, think Angular. So what happens here is that Angular is going to take a look at the DOM. It's going to take a look at all of our HTML and say, oh, I've just found the ngapp property, and it's pointing to noise Twitter. Oh, I seem to have a module called noise Twitter. I'm going to allow this module to essentially take control of all of the HTML underneath this body here. So that's how we essentially tell Angular that the DOM and our JavaScript are intertwined, essentially. Cool. Now, the next thing that we want to do is start changing around this DOM so it doesn't have all the data inside it. So change around this HTML so it doesn't have all the data inside it when it loads. We want to populate this data from our JavaScript, or we just basically want to separate the data from being sort of like dispersed out. I've got my my username here, I've got the time here, I've got the posts here. We want to get rid of all that. What we want to do essentially is turn this into more of a skeleton or a template that allows us to, based on what the data is, just populate all those individual values with what's somewhere else. And by the way, I keep talking about the data, the model. When it really comes down to it, the model in most JavaScript libraries is just an object, like an object, like key value pair object with maybe some arrays inside it and some strings inside that or numbers or whatever else. It's just data. That's all it is. And we just store it in a certain way that Angular knows to access it and then apply it to this page. That having been said, let's actually, before we go any further, let's go ahead and create that space within Angular to store our data, store the model portion of our stuff. What we do to store data is create something called a controller. That controller will, the controller is one of a few different ways in Angular 1 that you can essentially set up some data to be stored somewhere and then be able to apply it to the page, because the page will simply have access to it within this special area within JavaScript memory called the scope. You can think of scope as just like a function scope or whatever. You're able to add variables to it, add properties, add methods, add whatever else. And whatever things you add to the scope, you will also have access to all throughout anything that is being controlled by both the ng app and the ng controller, which is one part of this module. So let's go ahead and create a controller. Angular.control. Sorry. It's not Angular.controller. From here on, we're going to be accessing Angular.module. So we might as well keep a reference to it. So I'm going to say var app equals Angular.module. Cool. And now we can say app.controller. I'm just going to call it main controller. And to set up main controller, we're going to give it a function. This function is going to run whenever Angular notes that a certain part of the page is under the control of this main controller. And what I'm going to do is, well, let me think about this. Yeah, I might as well talk about this. So I talked about dependencies. I talked about how this module, in order to load in the first place, lists out a number of dependencies which need to be loaded up first. Well, the same thing can go for other parts of this module, such as this controller. Before this function can run, I might need to ask Angular for a certain number of things. So what I'm actually going to do is put this function inside an array. And this so just surrounded in square brackets. And as you know, an array can contain multiple values. This function is going to be the last value of this array. But all values that precede it are simply going to be a list of strings referring to other parts from within Angular or other modules that might be necessary, other sorts of things that I want to simply load up and inject into this function so I can run it the proper way. One thing that I'm going to need is access to something called $scope. $, by the way, has nothing to do with JavaScript. Sorry, nothing to do with jQuery. Even though jQuery has that $sign function that allows you to say, find this, find that. Angular uses the $sign at the beginning of certain names to basically denote that this is an internal value from Angular that you can have access to. So whenever you see something like that, this is something that is sort of built into the way Angular works that allows you to sort of ask it for certain things. So now that we're asking for something called $scope, this function will be run with scope being injected into it as the first argument. So now we can access scope. Let me slow down and make sure that people are on board so far with what I'm talking about. any confusion, I mean, obviously, maybe things will be sort of like cleared up once I actually add something into the scope and then apply it to the page. But so far, are there any questions that people can put into words? Any sorts of confusions that might actually be remediable? That I can remedy? No? Everything good so far? Any questions online? Let me double check. No questions online yet. Okay, cool. Let's have to go back. Okay, so what I like to do to this scope, I can do anything I want to this scope. This scope is an object onto which I can add anything. So what I'm going to add is something called tweets. And tweets is going to be an array. And this array is going to be an array of objects. Each object is going to represent a different tweet on the page. This is, by the way, something that I've decided to do. I can represent my data however I want. This is not something that Angular needs me to do, like supply it with an array of objects or something. This is just the best way for me to lay out the data that is currently on this page. So it's an array because, as you can see on the page, there's a list of stuff. And then each one of these has different points of data, like my avatar, the nickname, or so the username, and then the content and the time that it was posted. So those seem to be 4 things that I might want to hold on to. Oh, also, whether it's been retweeted and whether it's been liked. But I'm going to hold off on that just for a second. Okay, so let's start with tweet number 1 and say that the content is, you give love a bad name. I'm going to say the author is Jeffrey W. That the avatar is, I think, avatar.jpg. That the time it was posted is just going to be now, which is going to be silly. I mean, in the real world, this would be something like a date. And then you would use some sort of special function to turn it into the word now or something else before you actually put it into your view. But for now, I'm just going to store it as now. Yeah, so I think that's it. And I'm just going to do that 2 more times. I can just go ahead and put a little comma here at the end of this object and just copy and paste this 2 more times. And what are the other tweets? Old MacDonald had a farm. And I'm a little teapot short and stout. Whoa. Oh, and actually this is 1 hour. 2 hours, 3 hours, and let's fix our syntax error here by escaping this apostrophe with the backslash. So there we go. That is all the data on the page. A few people are still typing, so I'm just going to give it a second to sink in. Okay, cool. So now that I've got all the data on the page, I don't really have to care about what's inside this, this file here. I can get rid of a whole bunch of stuff. For example, I don't need 3 articles on the page. Each article represents a different tweet. But because my data, because the count of tweets is going to be represented by how long this array is, I don't need to print out my article 3 times in here. I only need to print it out once, and I want to turn it into more sort of a template of how the data should be represented. So first step, actually, well, before any of this, the first step is not only to say load up ng-app when you hit the body, but also specify that everything underneath here is going to be under the jurisdiction of the ng controller, main controller. Remember that I wrote these words, noise Twitter and main controller, in my app.js. So from here on, anything that I reference using these ng things inside the body will be referring to the scope of main control. So next, now that I've done that, I've added ng controller main control here. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of 2 of these articles because they're unnecessary. In this first article, I'm going to start adding a whole bunch of other ng stuff that tells it to do certain things, tells it to act a certain way. Basically, by adding ng throughout your page, you are making your DOM behave a certain way. So the thing that I want this article to behave like is to repeat. I want this article tag to repeat for, I think that it's going to be for tweet in tweets. I think that'll work. Yeah. It's actually been a little while since I've last written some Angular stuff, so I might, some specifics, I think that I'm right about this. So let's talk about what this means. Ng repeat, tweet in tweets. So, like I said, because I wrote this ng controller main control up here, I have access to something called tweets throughout this entire form, or throughout this entire body. It has nothing to do, by the way, with this class tweets here. Classes, and then anything that has ng dash whatever, those are 2 different worlds. This class is just meant for CSS styling at this point. I don't intend to use classes to, look for them and make any changes to them within my Angular world. From here on, whenever I add classes, they're only going to be for just like presentational CSS purposes. Because if I really want to change something around, then all I really have to do is start adding these ng things, and it'll work the way that I want it to. And of course, I'll be going through a whole bunch of other ng dash stuff as I go along. But what's happening inside ng repeat? Tweet in tweets. So again, tweets is referring to this array. Tweet, what's that? Well, I am creating a new variable called tweet that I have access to, and it's going to change for as many times as there are tweets. So this article is going to be printed out how many times do you think? 3 times, right, because there are 3 tweets. But every time that it's printed out, I'm going to have access to this special tweet variable that I can use ng whatever anywhere else to print out some certain values of it. So let me think about this. Yeah. So let's take a look at some stuff. First of all, ahref, twitter.com/jeffreysw. Well, I want to basically use the author of this tweet instead of that. So I could do some sort of ng something, and like ng bind will allow me to bind the value of something to the value to the things. But there's also actually a second way, other than using ng all over the place, and it's using a special syntax called handlebars syntax. Angular allows me to write out this little thing called handlebars, and it looks like this. Yeah, I think that's it. Tweet.author, yeah. So check it out. I'm using double brackets inside this string. And the cool thing about that is that it's going to basically just look for any double brackets throughout this entire chunk of HTML. And wherever it finds it, it's going to, well, in this case, it's going to take the tweet that it's iterating through currently and just replace this whole thing with the value of tweet.author. We can do the same thing here. Tweet.author. You can also do right here, same thing, tweet.author. Oh, and this person too. There we go. These double brackets are available within these attributes, within these double quote attributes inside the HTML element, but also as the text inside there. So regardless of whether they're inside one of these things or actually within the actual text within an element, you can use it both ways. Okay, so I think that we've gotten rid of Jeffrey HW throughout here, but let's next go on to the avatar. It looks like instead of avatar.jpg, we're going to do tweet.avatar. And let's see, instead of 1H, we're going to do tweet.time. And finally, instead of this, we're going to say tweet.content. Cool. So there you go. All right, any questions at this point? Let's take a look and see if it all works. It might not. I might have forgotten something. Looks like it worked. I did get an error. Tweet.avatar. Oh, that's not found. That's funny. Huh. That doesn't seem to have worked the way I wanted it to. What did I do wrong?
Here, I think the browser trying to load avatar, tweet.avatar, but does not exist yet because Angular did change that thing.
Oh, and then it, yeah, that actually brings up a good point. What's actually happening here is that, well, let's talk, of course, about the order of operations here. Before these JavaScript files down at the bottom can load, the HTML loads. The rest of the HTML loads. It goes HTML, HTML, HTML. Oh, time to download some CSS. Okay, and then I'm going to keep going HTML, HTML, HTML. Now, the deal is that this image file, even though it's got a really weird source thing and a really weird alt thing, is going to be loaded up onto the page prior to AngularJS even downloading, and definitely prior to our app.js loading. So if we don't want that to happen, then we've got a pretty simple solution, which is just to take this stuff and put it up here instead. Now, I have warned against this in previous classes. I basically said, oh wait, hold on a second. If you put your script tags in the head, then it's going to make it so the HTML on your page doesn't load up until all the JavaScript is on the page. But doesn't that seem to be like what we want in this case? We actually don't want our HTML to appear until the JavaScript actually has loaded, because if it did, then we'd get that weird flash of stuff. We'd get the browser trying to load the wrong kind of image. We'd actually start to see like very, for slower connections, it would actually be kind of worse. You might see like those handlebar things all over the page before AngularJS actually takes care of things. So by loading this first, we can be sure that that is not going to happen. Okay, well, I made a mistake. Let me see here. That also, okay. I'm probably going to undo one thing, which is move app back down here. Nope, that's still, Let me think about this.
So there's a special attribute you can use called NGS SRC. So.
Oh, ng source?
Yes.
Could do that. I could do that, but I also could do something else. One second. So let's just talk about these errors. This first error is happening for the same reason, that it's trying to load up the wrong sort of image file. This, on line 25 of app.js is a problem because it's currently trying to get the text area's value and get its length. The only problem is that because app.js is now loading before any of the HTML on the page loads, there is no text area, so you can't get a length of nothing. So that's why I have that error there. And I'm not sure if that's actually cascading and causing everything else to go wrong. But what I'm going to do, just for now, is get rid of, well, I'm actually just going to comment out this line here. Because calculate remaining characters is the only stuff on the page that expects certain stuff to be on the page, or needs certain stuff to be on the page for it to run. All these other things, looking for tweets, looking for submit, looking for text area on key up, that stuff isn't going to work anymore because it's going to run before the rest of the page loads, but we don't care because we're changing it all to Angular. But right now, we don't want to calculate remaining characters immediately when the page loads. We'll be moving that over to Angular shortly. So that having been done, okay, that does it, but it still loads tweet.avatar. So you might be right about doing ng source instead. Is it just like this?
ng source on the image.
Nope, that's not it. Oh, on the image. Oh, got it. Yes. All right. Yeah, oh, you're totally right. Okay. So Right. No, you're totally right. I remember this now. Sorry. Again, this has been a while. ng repeat. Remember, when you do any ng whatever, blah, 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 then it's great. If you have an image that doesn't actually have a source tag, then the browser isn't going to try to load it. Rather, Angular knows about this, and so it's going to find anything with an ng source and change it over to source so the browser does load it properly. But prior to that, it's not going to do anything. So, great. Now we've got, well, we still have a little bit of, see, a little bit of weird flickering going on here, which I'm sure there's a way that I could defer that one way or another, but I'm just not going to deal with it right now. I kind of forget how I usually solve it. Well, one way that I will actually solve it is later on is that instead of putting anything in the body whatsoever, many single-page apps are usually have almost an entirely blank body. The only thing that they actually have in there is a bunch of script tags which insert stuff into the body. One thing that we'll be able to do using Angular is take this thing like this article here, and maybe the form and other sort of stuff, and turn it all into a template that lives inside a script tag. And that's a little weird because up to this point, we've been using script tags to put JavaScript inside. Like all these script things just load up JavaScript files. But with Angular, you can put some HTML inside a script tag and specify that this is a template for Angular to use somewhere down the line. So Angular has this built-in functionality. Since I'm talking about it, I might as well do it. Angular has some built-in functionality to, well, actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm not going to do it. I'll do it later if I have the time because I'll get a little bit too much off track. But it does have the ability to take some stuff from somewhere else and then inject it or include it wherever you want it to be. But we'll skip that for a little bit. Anyway, as you can see, the page is as usual. The buttons have stopped working. The form has stopped working. Tweeting doesn't really do anything anymore, so that's too bad. But as you can see, the stuff actually does get printed out, and it's all thanks to the combination of ng repeat, which is looping through our list of tweets, and then all these little handlebars interpolations throughout here that are printing out different parts of that tweet object that we're iterating through. Cool. Any questions at this point? Thoughts about how things work, why they're working, what have you? Anyone hopelessly lost? If you're hopelessly lost, I can help. I will say that, you know, although this comes naturally to me now, when I started learning Angular, it seems to me like it was a very high learning curve. That it took me a long time to sort of wrap my head around certain concepts. There is a very long list of ng this, ng that, and the documentation isn't the most straightforward stuff in the world. Like, let me close this if I can and take a look at the API reference. The Angular API is all listed out here, and it's not as straightforward as you'd expect it to be. A lot of these ng so-and-so, ng form, ng height, ng href, ng, most of these can be used as attributes like ng dash whatever, but they can also be used in different ways. There's a whole bunch of strange stuff going on there. There's the concept of how some of these things, like, as you see, these are all camel case, lowercase ng, uppercase d disabled. Certain things that have camel case names can also be referenced in HTML using dash case. That sort of translation is often automatic and sometimes confuses people. So that's another sort of little weird quirk to Angular. But and then that's one thing that might trip you up if you're looking for stuff throughout the documentation. But just like we were saying, you can take a look at, say, ng source. Angular markup like hash in a source attribute doesn't work right. The browser will fetch the URL with the literal text until Angular replaces the expression. ng source directly solves that problem. So once you actually do find the right page you're looking for, then it's a straightforward thing. So ng source instead of source. There you go. Cool. Okay, where are we next? Let's see here. So we're now able to list out the tweets. I think the next thing we want to do is be able to add a new tweet, right? Cool. So, right. Let's talk about event listeners. of course, again, in Angular, in jQuery, what you do is you find something by a class or by some other selector, and you say on this, on submit, so and so. But in the case of Angular, there is a different attribute or directive, if you will, for. Oops, sorry, I made the page wrong. There's a different directive for every kind of event you could be listening for, such as ng-submit. Enables binding Angular expressions to on-submit events. So when you add an ng-submit attribute to a form, then you can go ahead and run some code upon submission. So let's do that. So I just added ng-submit add tweet right here. So let's talk about this code. What's happening here is that inside these quotation marks, I've just essentially created my own little function. Now, my function that I created is not called add tweet. This is actually a function that is calling another thing that I haven't yet created called add tweet. But whenever I use ng-submit or ng-click or ng any sort of other event listener, essentially anything that I write inside here, I can even do multiple things. You know, it's just a series of different expressions, and it's just kind of like I just created my own little anonymous function that's right here. So, you know, the first thing it does is add tweet. The second thing it does is console.log you did it. So if I do this now, it's probably going to, is it going to do it? Oh, it's not. I must have done, well, probably what happened is it tried to run add tweet and it failed silently. So before I can actually see a little console.log you did it, I need to create something called add tweet. So, but where does add tweet live? How can I access a function called add tweet? You know, do I just say var add tweet equals so and so? Nope, because all this ng stuff here happening within the body operates within a certain scope. So I just can't access the global window scope and expect it to work. So instead of doing var add tweet, I simply just do scope.add tweet is a function. And this function can do whatever I want it to do. So I need to add something to my list of tweets. I specifically want to put a new tweet at the very beginning of my list, so it shows up at the top. So I could do this. I can say scope.tweets.unshift, which means put at the beginning a new item. And then I'm just going to pass in an object. So the object is going to be author Jeffrey W. Avatar is avatar.jpg. Time is now. But what about the content? How do we get the content? Where should the content come from? Okay, so let's talk about binding. So far, we have done some one-way binding of certain things in our scope are now bound to wherever we see these handlebar things. But there's also the concept of two-way binding, where you can basically say that certain fields on the page, certain text fields or other sorts of items, that whatever value is currently typed into the field is bound to your scope. Whereas if you change the scope, then that change is bound to the text field and will be represented in that text field. So it's pretty powerful. You can basically just tell Angular at certain points throughout the life cycle, hey, change this field, and all of a sudden that field will just immediately update. But also, if you change stuff within the view, that is just type stuff into the text area as usual, your scope will automatically update with the new value. So that's pretty powerful stuff. How do we do that two-way binding to make it so this text area has a value of whatever we tell it to be? It looks like this. ng model is going to be, I'm going to say, I don't know, tweet text. I don't know. Actually, let's say new tweet text. That's a better name. So ng model. Remember we talked about model view stuff? Well, essentially by using ng model, we're saying that this view, this text area here, is bound to new tweet text within the model. And the model that we're talking about right now is the scope of the controller, main controller. So now that we've done that, I'm pretty sure that we can basically just go back into app.js and say content is scope.newTweetText. I actually don't. I'm not ta-da just yet. I might be wrong. There might be one or two things I'm missing. Let's see if I'm wrong. Yep, I'm wrong. So something cool happened though. I did press the tweet button and a new tweet appeared on the page. Why is that? I mean, we didn't tell the DOM to update whatsoever. We just simply added a new tweet to the beginning of this array, and Angular took care of the rest. Everything that happens within one of these things like add tweet or whatever. Oh, and also, did we do it? Oh no, it didn't do console.log. Oh, you know what? It can't do console.log you did it because for the same reason that we couldn't say var add tweet equals something. Console lives in the global scope. Console does not live on our main controller scope, so this code is not going to work. It's interesting. That's called an isolated scope situation where it doesn't have access to anything outside of it. So yeah, anyway. So just add tweet is fine. We don't even need a semicolon. Anyway, that doesn't explain why this doesn't work, though. I wonder if I need to define it first as a string before I can make changes to it or have access to it. Let me try that. Let's just say scope.newTweetText is going to be an empty string to start out. I just want to double check if that actually works. Yes?
Your NV model in your closing tag, I don't know if that would affect it.
That would totally 100% affect it. Thank you. Thanks. You did some good sanity checking there. Never put an attribute in a closing tag, ever. It doesn't make sense. So yeah, thanks. I just was not paying attention because I saw this text area close there and open the other place. So yes, sorry. Let's try that again. Ah, that was the problem. Simple mistake on my part. Never put attributes in closing tags. It's simply not part of the HTML language. The end. Cool. Okay, so that was easy then. Didn't need to even define it first. Just that binding seems to set the value to a string when I started typing into the field. Initially, before it's anything, it's probably the value of undefined, meaning that it simply hasn't been set by anything. Although maybe it's initially set as a string once the text area appears on the page. I'm not sure. Anyway, simply by doing ng model, we've got that two-way binding going on, where typing into the text area sets what's in the scope and vice versa. Cool thing about that, because like I said, it's a two-way binding, is that now that I have unshifted a new tweet onto the list of tweets, I can set the new tweet text content to blank again. Ta-da! So, you know, clearing the field is as simple as saying basically the value is now an empty string, and that's all. That's all I have to do. Coming from a jQuery world, Angular to me felt kind of refreshing because I was writing a lot more plain JavaScript than I was writing a whole bunch of like chained jQuery statements like .find, .hide, .add class, .this, .that. I mean, it's all JavaScript at the end of the day, but this stuff looks a lot more like straightforward, just regular JavaScript than this sort of stuff where we're doing .prop, .on, .closest, .toggle class, and sort of just living within that jQuery ecosystem. You could take a lot of this code and just get rid of the idea of scope or whatever else, and then just like take this function, and it could be a function living anywhere, really, But so that's one thing I kind of like about these libraries, that sort of abstract the view away from the actual data management that you're doing here. So yeah, there we go. We've got a working form. One thing that I'm not doing right now is counting the amount of remaining characters, but that's actually very simple. See this tweetbox counter here? It's just 140 minus new tweet text dot length. Cool. How's it going? Did you want to give me the headphones? Yeah, no, come on up. So I'm going to forget about it otherwise. Thank you. I left them here on Thursday. Thanks a lot for holding on to them. Cool. All right. Yep. So again, anything inside these, oh, actually, I didn't even mention that. Anything inside these double brackets doesn't have to just be the name of a value. It can be a JavaScript expression. Just like this is a JavaScript expression, so is this. This just gets run immediately whenever it tries to render out this div. And so it's just going to do this math every time it needs to re-render that div. It's just going to say 140 minus new tweet text.length. We're going to have a problem initially, though. Oh, no, we're not. I take it back. This actually answered my question of whether new tweet text becomes a string or not. If new tweet text dot length or new tweet text is undefined and I tried to get dot length on it, that would be an error and it wouldn't render anything out. But it seems that because I said ng model equals new tweet text, that immediately a string value gets set in my model and I have access to it right on the next line. So I'm able to subtract the length from that. But there we go. Simple as that. Now I have a working thing. In fact, it works better than it did when I did jQuery because I had to do that weird key up thing where entering in multiple characters didn't actually work until I keyed up on the thing. Now it's doing it a different way. Whatever specific thing, key press, is causing the actual data to show up on the field. That is exactly when the value gets changed and the calculation gets run and different parts of the DOM update whenever they need to. Cool. Good stuff. All right, so we've got that counter. This whole thing, this little thing right here, replaces this entire calculate remaining characters thing. Well, actually, I'm sorry, I take that back. It replaces these two lines. But we do want to disable that input field whenever we are at 140 or whether we are at less than 0, right? So looks like I'm going to be using 140 a few more times. So I might as well set it in my scope so I have access to it. I'm just going to say scope.character limit is 140. Simple enough. And now wherever I reference 140, I can just replace it with the word character limit. All right, character limit, I'm just going to take that and do character limit. I'm also going to do right here ng-disabled, and then this is going to be a little expression that runs and determines whether this should be disabled or not. If it evaluates to true or evaluates to false. Basically, I can just copy and paste what I did up here. Remaining characters is less than 0, remaining characters is equal to character limit. Although remaining characters I haven't specified, that's actually this, character limit minus new tweet text.length. So I could paste this whole thing in here, like I'm doing now. Or instead of that, I could make it the result of running a function. Here's what I think. I think that the view should have as little logic as possible. This is a little bit of logic. This is me actually subtracting new tweet text.length from character limit. I think that's feasible. That's fine. It's just a single operation. But if you start having a really big Boolean statement, or you have multiple lines of code inside an ng so-and-so, you might consider just making a function for it inside your scope and calling that function instead. It makes your view a lot more readable, or at least say a little more focused on presentation, where all of your behavior still lives within your scope. So let's just create a new function called scope.character I don't know, form valid. And then we're going to return, we're going to say var remaining characters is scope.new tweet text minus, I'm sorry, yeah, scope.character limit minus scope.new tweet text. Then we return whether remaining characters is less than 0 or whether remaining characters is equal to scope.character limit. So remember, we can, by returning this whole thing, we're going to be returning a Boolean, right? So because this is a Boolean statement here, is less than 0. This is a Boolean statement here, is equal to character limit. And this is a little Boolean thing that takes either one on the left or the right and turns it into true or false, right? Yeah. Yes, it should. Thank you. It should. Yeah. Because we are doing some subtraction of numbers from numbers here, we can't do subtract a number from a string. So yes, you're exactly right. Length of new tweet text. Cool. So now that we've got this form valid function, we can just do it right here. Form valid. Ta-da. So that little function is going to run form valid. The statement here is running form valid whenever it needs to determine whether this will be disabled or not. Let's try it out. It didn't work. Cannot read property length of undefined. Aha. Aha. Okay. So there was a problem on line 71, app.js 71, saying cannot read property length of undefined. The reason for that is because, well, ng model new tweet text was set right here. But chances are it ran this ng disabled thing before new tweet text was actually like available within the scope. Maybe that would be like the next scope or something. So to solve this problem, I'm simply just going to say scope.new tweet text is empty string, and now it will never be undefined, and this function will have immediate access to it. That should probably solve the problem, I think. And there we go. Now it is disabled. Now it is enabled. Disabled again. And if I keep typing, then eventually it will be disabled again. Ta-da! Cool. There we are. Any questions about this? Thoughts about how this works? As you can see, disabled simply, ng disabled simply takes a statement which must evaluate to either true or false, and then it either disables or does not disable it. Cool. So there's our nice working form. There's our ability to add new tweets. We might as well go ahead and set up these retweet and like buttons. So here's some cool stuff. Remember that within this article, we have access to a value called tweet. We created it right here within this ng-repeat clause. And what ng-repeat does is it actually creates a child scope. It creates a child scope that exists throughout the page as long as the page is open. And within this scope, it has access to stuff outside of it. Like if I wanted to access form valid or new tweet text or add tweet, I could. But it only has access to the specific tweet that it's iterating through as long as this thing runs. So that having been said, we want to add some functionality to this retweet and like, these retweet and like buttons. We want to make it so we can run a specific function that causes the current tweet to become liked or retweeted or whatever else. So first thing I'm going to do is just say ng click, that is the listener for click, of course, retweet, and I'm going to say tweet. ng click is going to be like tweet. So that's interesting. I seem to be passing in the tweet into a function called retweet or a function called like. So remember, throughout this article, I have access to tweet, and I can do whatever I want to it, which includes passing it into other functions. So the only thing is I have to create these functions, retweet and like. So let's go ahead and do it. Scope.retweet is going to be a function that can be passed in a tweet. Why do I know that? Because I'm doing it right here. I'm saying retweet, and I'm passing in the current tweet. And all I really have to do within scope.retweet is say tweet.retweeted is going to be true. Or if it's already retweeted, I want to unretweet it. So maybe I'll go ahead and say scope.retweeted is the opposite of tweet.retweeted. Sorry, not scope.retweeted. Tweet.retweeted is whatever tweet.retweeted is not. That is to say, if it isn't retweeted, then it will be, and vice versa. Yes. And then I can do the same thing with like. Dot liked is not dot liked. Cool. So these functions, retweet and like, they'll work for every tweet on the page. Because I'm passing them in, I'm only changing the one that we're currently clicking the button for. Because remember, we're going to be printing out these two buttons for every tweet that there is on the page, but they're all operating within a different scope. And that scope refers to the current tweet that's being iterated through. So you have to take my word for it that it works because I haven't added an ng class of retweeted or liked to the thing to be able to do that. Give me a second because I seem to remember something about how ng class works. I think that I can give it a list or something weird like that. Oh yeah, I can give it an object. Cool, so ng class is expression. Now the expression is going to be either a string representing space-delimited class names, an array, or a map, or an object, of class names to Boolean values. So specifically, what I can do is I'm going to add an ng class to this article. So I can add additional classes based on whether certain things are true or false. Just like I did with jQuery, I added class retweeted or class liked to article. But what I'm actually going to pass into the ng class directive is an object. And the object is going to be a series of true and false values. So it's going to look like this. Let me just go ahead and put this on a different line so it's a little easier to see. So this is single brackets because this is going to be a statement that returns an object. And this object has two values in it, retweeted and liked. The values are whether the current tweet has the value of retweeted or not, or whether it has a class of the thing of liked or not. If these are true, if either of these is true, then those classes will be added on to this list of classes for this tweet. And if they're not, they just won't. So all you do is you just set a whole bunch of true-false stuff, and it'll either add retweeted and liked or not. So that's how ng class works. Ta-da! It works. As you can see, if I inspect the HTML, you'll see that it adds a class of liked, adds a class of retweeted, or removes it. It also adds a class of ng scope, which is just kind of for debugging purposes. What it's essentially telling me there is that whenever I iterate through this article, it's creating a new scope right there. It's basically saying this is a new part of the page. And if I wanted to somehow illustrate that some way, like if I wanted to draw a border or an outline around every new element on the page that generates a new scope, in which I can access new variables, then I could do that. You know, like it would look like this. Check it out. I just did ng scope is going to be outline 1px solid red. So now there is a 1 pixel outline around everything on the page that has a new scope. This whole thing, the whole body, has a class of ng scope because that's where I define the ng controller in which a new scope is created. And then each one of these tweets also has an outline, or they have a class of ng scope because ng repeat creates a new scope in which I can use the tweet corresponding to this current tweet, right? So there you go. That's just a nice little visual thing that I could do if I wanted to. Let's see. Man, we really blazed through it, didn't we? I think I've pretty much just replicated all the behavior of all the code that we've written. So that means I can get rid of all of the jQuery. It's all gone. And there's actually less code than there was. All I've got is a single controller which within its scope is the character limit, the list of tweets, which I'm just going to iterate through, the current text field value, a function that allows me to see whether the form is valid or not, so I can disable the button, a function that goes ahead and modifies our tweets array up here and sets the new tweet text to something else, and then these two functions which retweet and like the thing. So at the end of the day, these are very plain JavaScript functions that are just being added on to an object called scope. And I just have access to them within my HTML by using ng whatever. Cool. I have a few more things that I can talk about, but does anyone have any questions at this point? Okay. I feel like this class took like twice as long last time, which is why I feel a little uneasy, because I feel like I'm blazing through stuff and not explaining it well enough or leaving people in the dust. So really, if anyone wants me to go over anything more at this point, then I'm very happy to do so. Things that people might not understand. I think the thing that was hardest for me to surmount was just the idea that within any of these quotation marks throughout the code, I have access to my JavaScript. So each one of these is actually a little JavaScript expression where I can just run stuff. But all that said, the idea is that I'd like to make these expressions as succinct as possible, which is why I leave all the logic inside my JavaScript file. You know. So in other words, instead of saying retweet tweet, I could just actually write a series of different lines of JavaScript from here, but that would be a little icky. So I try not to do that. I try to defer to an actual function that's in the scope instead. Okay, next thing that I want to do is take everything on this page and relegate it to a template. That will prevent that weird behavior where when you first load the page, you might see that little weird flash of brackets and stuff on the page. We don't want that to happen. So what I'm going to do is create a template for this entire page. And then I'm also going to create a template for each individual tweet. And we're going to see how that all gets used. Creating a template is as simple as adding a new script tag. And the script, interestingly enough, is not going to have a source attribute, but is going to have a type attribute of text/ng template. That's obviously specific to Angular. And then it's also going to have an ID. And the ID is how I'm going to be able to refer to it wherever I want to use it. And so I'm going to create an ID of index.html. Actually, no, I'm sorry, main.html. Let's call it that instead. That allows it to pretty much be the same thing as the controller, so main.html. And inside this script, I am seriously just going to take the entirety of the body from this form all the way down to the end of this section and cut and paste it right there. Maybe just do a little bit of indentation so I know what I'm doing here. Yep. Oops, this was not on the right page. Let's try that again. So my body is now pretty much empty. Nothing in my body, everything in this script, and that will indeed break the page. So there is something that I need to do here. I need to do a simple ng include. So ng include allows me to include a template. Pretty much straightforward as that, and it looks like this. Actually, I forget what it looks like. 1 second. Source. Source is going to be main.html. Now, this is interesting. This is the first case on the page in which I've used an element that is definitely not part of HTML. What I mean by element is that the actual name of the element is ng-include. In every other case, I used ng-repeat, ng-class, ng-click, but these were all attributes rather than the actual name of the element. But in Angular, many directives, every one of these things is related to a directive, which is just a whole bunch of like behavior that you can apply to some part of your page. These directives can be represented as attributes, or they can also be represented as elements in some cases. So in this case, I don't really need something like div or span or section or whatever. I just need to have a single element that will pretty much just, I think, replace itself in most cases with the contents of main.html. Does it work? Nope. I did something wrong. Oops. What did I do wrong? I actually don't know. Do I need something else? Source is string. Source is string. String. Argument. So-and-so. My partial template. This is stupid. Nope, that didn't work either. What did I do wrong this time? Cannot load main.html. It's actually trying to load a file instead of a template. How do I get it to load a template? I actually forget. The what?
The reference.
Oh, the reference?
To a file.
It's a reference to a file, but I'm trying to give it a reference to main.html. So how do I give it a reference to that?
Maybe just use hash in the form of the string.
Hash? Well, this isn't a selector. This isn't like a CSS selector, so I can't use hash to refer to something else on the page. Because it has to be valid.
The same file, right?
Huh?
You need to reference to the same file.
Yes. Yeah, but that's not how you do it. I'm actually literally going to Google this up because I forget. Let's see, ng template include. Oh, well, sure, it's on this page somewhere. Oh, maybe it's ng bind template instead. Template URL, to load templates from other domains. Yeah, it actually is going to load an external HTML fragment, so that's probably not what I want. Let's try ng bind template instead. ng bind template, no, that's not it either. 1 second. Aha. ID is tpl.html. ng-click current TPL is tpl.html. I get it. Okay. So I actually have to refer to something within the scope. So what I'm going to do inside my scope is say current page is main.html. And now instead of referring to main.html, wait, hold on a second. Let me think about this a little bit more. That really shouldn't change anything because I should just be able to refer to it by, again, this is me being rusty with Angular. Yeah, that didn't work either. Try that again. Let's see here. X/ng template. Did I do this correctly? Current TPL is tpl.html, tpl link. PPL content. Let's try a div instead of this ng include thing and see if it makes any difference. Nope, that didn't work either. Still trying to load it externally. But it seems to me like right here it should just do it. Am I doing this correctly? Text/ng template. I could do /main, but /main.html, but that really shouldn't make any difference. /main.html. Current page. Trying to do that. Let's see here. Now it's trying to access main.html at the root of my file system, which is not any better. That's strange. It does seem to differ from the from what I'm used to. So I must be doing something wrong, but I forget what it is. No one has any suggestions from online, right? No. Inline stuff, script type. Maybe it has to do. Maybe I can't put this up in my head. Would it make any change if I did this inside the body instead? Probably not.
Maybe external file. Maybe an external file.
Nope. It turned out that that no, it was all about just not being in the head, and it must be in the body instead.
Oh,
That's
it was like outside the actual ng app.
That's totally it. Yeah, no, you're totally right. The script, I couldn't have access to main.html because this was running outside the jurisdiction of ng app, and so Angular had no idea what I was talking about. So yes, you're totally right. If you're using a script with text/ng template, regardless of what the ID is, this ID can be rutavegas. It doesn't matter. I can call this anything that I want, but it needs to be referred to right here. And there we go. It still works. Now, let's just go back to main.html since that was silly. So why am I using double quotes and then single quotes here? Well, because this source parameter is going to be evaluated like a JavaScript expression, just like this, or actually that's not a JavaScript expression, sorry, just like what's inside these brackets and everything. So whatever's inside here is going to be evaluated like an expression. And /main.html is not valid JavaScript. A string is, though. So if I take this expression and put a string inside it using single quotes, then it's fine. Or I could just do what I did up here in app.js saying current page. And that is what routing is all about. I actually saved this until usually until the second week. In other words, I'm not really going to be talking about it in depth. But there is the idea of Angular being able to treat your single page app as if it has multiple routes. What there is a little thing called ng-route or ng-router, whatever it is. It looks at what's in your URL, and based on what your URL is, it loads up a different template. It also loads up a different controller. It essentially very tightly links your controller to a specific template that's loaded up. And you know, then you can click links that take you to a new page, quote unquote, but actually just change what the current controller is and what the current template is. So that's actually, we're doing the very basics of it right here. We've got this new variable called current page, and if we wanted to change it and show a different page, we totally could do that. Okay, another thing that I want to do is, just in case I wanted to have a separate page, just in case I wanted to be able to show a single tweet, one of these single tweets on a different page, then I'd probably want to remove it from within this big template for main.html. So what I'm going to do is create yet another script type text/ng template and call it tweet.html. What I'm going to do is take this article here. Actually, let me think about this. I think I actually just want to take the contents of the article. Nah, I do want that whole article. Ah, yes. Okay, I think I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a div with an ng include. Source is going to be tweet.html in, remember, double brackets because that's HTML, and then single brackets because that's Java. Sorry, double quotes and then single quotes because it's JavaScript inside that HTML. Then I'm also going to take this ng repeat, take it off the article, and put it right here, because the article template, the tweet template specifically, I don't want that template to repeat itself. Rather, I want to repeat the template. See the difference? Instead of telling the template itself to iterate through a series of tweets, that's not really a template for a single tweet. That's a template for tweets plural. So instead, I'm going to take that ng repeat outside of this whole article thing, and I'm going to cut it, paste it up here, and unless I'm doing something horribly wrong, I think this should just work. So what I did again was replace everything inside section with this ng include with the source of tweet.html, which is going to load up this script type text ng template with an ID of tweet.html. And I think that this should have access to tweet because I'm creating a new scope right here. So let me see if I'm correct about that. Yep, I'm correct about that. Yeah, so what's happening is that because this ng include div is what's responsible for creating a new scope, it's including all of this HTML inside it, and it has access to everything, to this new scope that I created here, where tweet is whatever it is. And it should all just work the same, I think. Retweet, like, yep, ta-da, it works. Okay. So you'll now notice, no matter how much I refresh, or no matter how slow I try to go, or fast I try to go, I will not see any of those brackets or anything. I will see a flash of blue, and that's the part at which simply the HTML or Angular hasn't started itself up yet. It hasn't initialized yet. So, you know, there are some cases maybe if you think that your JavaScript is going to be really, really big, that you might want to put some loading spinner or something, a little GIF that just shows a little rotating spinner before the actual page loads. You know, or you don't have to. It's up to you. You can do whatever you want. But yeah, that's great. All we've really done is now created this separate little tweet here that we can do anything with. You know, if we wanted to have a separate page that just loaded that up, then we're ready for that. But honestly, I'm tired of talking about it. So another thing that I should talk about, which I also don't have time to run through or describe or whatever, in addition to the whole Angular router thing that allows me to, you know, load up multiple pages from a single page, is the idea of these directives and the fact that you can create your own directive. So a directive is a little bit of behavior that you can ascribe to any element on the page. And this behavior has a whole lot of stuff going for it. A directive can run some code whenever you add simply the name of the directive to any element on the page. It can replace the element entirely with something new. So it can come with a template. It can simply be tied to a template all of its own. So instead of creating this text ng template here and then using the ng include thing to include it on the page, I can simply add a div or add a new element with the word tweet in it and create a directive called tweet, which would know to load up a specific template and just insert it in there. It can have a controller of its own, which is very similar to it having just its own scope, which will happen regardless. There's also the idea where a directive can set up binding. And we talked about this earlier, where this text area, for example, the fact that we've got this ng model thing means that we have some two-way binding between whatever's typed into the text area and whatever's available inside our scope of new tweet text. And so we can change it back and forth and it just happens, right? There's the ability when you create your own directive to set up two-way binding. You can pass in additional parameters that might be coming from the scope outside whatever you're creating. You know, there's the idea of isolating a new scope and only using certain variables that you need. There's a whole bunch of stuff having to do with directives. But thinking about creating new directives and using them and like, becoming a master at them is where the difficulty curve spikes in Angular. Because the idea of creating your own directive with its own behavior, its own template, its own scope, its own binding, all of these other sorts of rules, requires the knowledge of something called the directive definition object, which just looks bad. It looks like this. Ta-da, my module.directive, directive name. And then here's all the stuff that you could put into it. Priority, template, transclude, restrict, template name, scope, controller, controller as, bind to controller, require, multi-element, compile, and then all that stuff. So it goes on forever, and me having to walk through what all this means is just significantly difficult. I did, in previous series, I did talk about like the basics of it, but I'm pretty much out of time at this point. So, but the idea is that you do have full control over more than just what all these different ng- directives that come with Angular, but you can create your own with as much weird behavior as you want. So that is where the magic of becoming an Angular expert, like that's the draw of doing that whole sort of thing. Of course, we are talking about Angular 1, where in Angular 2, this entire paradigm is pretty much thrown out the window. Instead of the idea of directives, there's the idea of components, which also have sort of been backported as an idea into Angular 1. So Angular 1 also has this concept of components as well, but I know nothing about them, so I really can't teach it. Anyway, Angular 1 is still a pretty nice library. It makes sense to a certain extent. I'd say that it does mess up your HTML quite a lot and turns it into a whole big nest of weird brackets all over the place. But that's something that's not only specific to Angular. You'll see that often in a lot of other template languages, including JSX, which React uses. So we'll be talking about that in the next 2 weeks. Yeah, but as you can see, we've removed all of the data from this, and all that we have in return is a relatively empty body with nothing but script tags and a single div, and all of the actual data and behavior is pretty much defined here inside our JavaScript file that we've written. So there we are. That's where we're at. Any other questions before I say we're all done for the day? Any other thoughts? Anyone online have any thoughts? No thoughts. That's fine. Cool. Neat. Well, then there we go. Next week, we're going to be doing this yet again in a different language, and it's going to be React. The first week is going to be on React, vanilla, just React. But React itself is a pretty basic library, so we'll be talking about other things that kind of sit on top of that, such as state management libraries like Redux, which we'll specifically be looking at. Yeah, that's about it. So cool, thanks. I do have an assignment in in Angular, I'm pretty sure, I think, maybe, I forget. Oh yeah, actually I have 2 of them. If you really do want to create your own directives, then you can do 2 assignments. This one will require some additional study. If you are interested more in getting into Angular, I have taught that second class on Angular before. So if you want to see more on it, then I'm not going to waste my own time talking about it. But you can go to previous classes, click all the way down to class notes from previous series, and then within series 9, you can go over to directives, routing, and Ajax with AngularJS for April 11th, and watch the video for that, the lecture videos right there. Yep, so that's where you can get more information. Cool. We're all done. Come to my lab on Thursday. I will be here to answer any of your questions. I'm going to be sitting in the Turing classroom right behind me. In this classroom, there's going to be like a programming for interviews thing. Or no, that's every other week, so that's not this week, but coming up next. But yeah, I'll also be sending out an assignment, so if you are not on the mailing list, then just go ahead and get on one of the mailing lists or a Facebook group or the meetup group. I announce all of the lectures and labs and all of the assignments and all the stuff through every one of those venues. Finally, donate to Noise Bridge, because you're going to want to do that. Set up a recurring payment for $100 every month, or $160 actually. Do that, and you're good. Great. Cool. All right, no problem. See you guys later.